A very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining this special discussion on the India at 75 Fireside chat series on I Have a Dream. A very good morning to our friends who are joining us from Europe, and a very good evening to those who are joining us from the rest of Asia. One of the reasons we try and time it around this time is because, we really want to discuss India in a larger global context and its position as we move from India at 75 towards India at 100. And today to, engage with us in this very exciting topic on how can really industry level the playing field for India at 100, we have none other than Dr. Naushad Forbes. He's the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, which is India's leading process and energy efficiency company. And I must highlight energy efficiency because not only does Forbes Marshall do it for themselves, but it helps industry actually build and sustain highly efficient plants by reducing waste, optimizing process, energy efficiency, complying with regulatory requirements, something that's going to be a very, very important and critical aspect for India, as we move forward. And knowing Naushad over these years, this is definitely one company and one person who walks the talk really strongly. Forbes Marshall has also been ranked as a great place to work and aspiring to be a multinational with Indian roots. Again, a space that, India hopes to occupy with much greater intensity over the next 25 years. Naushad's also been the chairman of, he is the chairman of Ananta Aspen Center and the Center for Technology, Innovation and Economic Research. He is, on several education boards and institutions. He's a founding member of the Nayanta University, a full-service university, which is opening in 2024, spearheaded by CII. And of course, I think a large part of that thought and vision probably came up when he was the president of CII from 2016, in 2016-17. He's been a teacher at Stanford University and developed courses, again, very important for me to emphasize this, on technology in newly industrializing countries. And of course, is a full-fledged alumni from Stanford, having done his bachelor's, master's, and PhD, from there. And of course, an author, Naushad, your latest book, The Struggle and the Promise, Restoring India's Potential, was published last year. So, we do have someone who is a deep thinker, a contributor, as well as a leader, not only for India where it is today, but where it will, go in the future. So welcome, Naushad, and thank you for taking the time to participate in this conversation. The idea is to bring minds like yours to think, in a larger context of India, collectively try and build a bottom-up and a top-down and a multi-stakeholder vision document for our future, evaluate it every 5 years, and nourish it, with ingredients that will enable us to reach to the best of our potential as a country. So with that, maybe a great way to start this conversation, since it is about, India at 100 and how do we really make that happen? And I know that's also a very important part, for you. So, if you were to go to bed tonight and, dream of India at 100, what do you think will appear in your dream? And when you wake up 15th August 2047 and look around you, what's the India you will see? I'm presuming that's the dream. And I think our conversation today will be, to navigate from you going to bed tonight and to waking up on that 15th August 2047. And really, what do we need to do to make sure that happens? So what's your vision, your dream for India at 100?
So, Rajan, first of all, thank you for not only this conversation, but for hosting this series of conversations. And second, for your many years of leadership of first India at 75 and now India at 100. It's really invaluable in helping us really put together this broad objective for us as a country, and then to get so many useful efforts underway that will get us there. So thank you for all of your leadership in this area. And as I say, not just in the short run, but over many, many years. And look forward to many more as well. So my dream for India at 100 As you know, when I speak about things, I always like to think in threes. So I have three parts to the dream. The first part is an obvious part, which is certainly I would expect an India at 100 to be a much wealthier country. So to be a country which ranks in the upper income category among all countries worldwide. We should be by then, by the time we're 100 years old as an independent country, we should be amongst the world's wealthier countries. And this will take a rate of growth over this period, over these next 25 years, 24 years. That is very significant. It will take a rate of growth of probably around, if you work out the numbers, I think it will take a rate of growth of around 8-9% year on year for 25 years. It's not that countries haven't done that before. China has done it for the last 40 years. Japan did it in the 50s and 60s. South Korea, Taiwan did it in the 60s and 70s. Countries have done it for extended periods of time. We need to as well. In these next 25 years, we need to have a rapid rate of economic growth. And this rapid rate of economic growth will then translate into us being a wealthier upper income country by 2047. That's the first element. The second element is that it's not enough to just be much wealthier overall as a country. This growth has to be inclusive, and it needs to be more inclusive than it has been in recent years. And I hope we can talk about that more later on as well, about how we can be more inclusive in our growth processes and what role industry can play in that inclusive growth process. And my metric, if you like, for inclusive growth is that our median income needs to be a lot higher than it is now. So not just average income, but median income needs to be a lot higher than it is now. And it needs to be amongst the world's highest median incomes. In other words, the typical Indian, 24 years from now, should be living a prosperous, healthy, comfortable, clean life. That opportunity is what we need to be able to provide to the average Indian citizen, not just to those who are wealthier. And the third piece, if you like, of the dream is, I think I dream of us being a model of a liberal democracy. We have been a model for the world as a democracy when we were a very poor country. But we were a model because we were this almost isolated example of a very poor country that was simultaneously democratic and followed democratic principles. And I hope that those principles of being a democracy and being a liberal democracy not only sustain, but grow and develop and deepen. And this should show in the institutions that we have as a country 24 years out. The depth of the institutions, the independence of those institutions, the spread of those institutions across different walks of life. It should show in the principles that we stand for of a rules-based international order. And it should show in our leadership of multilateral institutions. So we contribute not only to our own well-being, but to the wider well-being of the world. So I look to an India that is wealthier. I look to an India that is much more wide in its coverage of affluence and in the average Indian being living a really comfortable, healthy, high opportunity life. And I look to an India that is a model for many others in how to behave in the world.
No, I think, you set such a bar of an aspiration that, humanity hasn't seen before, right? I don't think ever in the history, a country of 1.4 billion people, on the principles of a liberal democracy, have been able to bring an economic transformation of this size and scale and make it inclusive. So, thank you, Naushad, for sharing that aspiration. And I tell you that this is the potential of a country, that can technically be achieved, over 2.5 decades. So I know it's very doable. It's about us figuring out, how do we align around such a large aspiration and then of course get all the nuts and bolts together, to make it happen. But, in your comments, you mentioned, one thing that we should go deeper on, and I want to go right away a little into that. And, that is about the whole inclusive agenda, right? And you talk of a median income, because for a very large country, that's not really that easy, right? A smaller
It's not
country,
easy.
it's not easy. How do we create an equitable environment, for India at 100? How do we really, inclusion requires promoting diversity, in our workforce, supply chains, business practices. It's a holistic exercise. And so what role can industry really play, to make this happen?
So, I think, first of all, inclusion is good in itself, and it's good actually for industry and good for business. It's good in itself for obvious reasons. You have less poverty, you have greater equality, you have especially greater equality of opportunity. Everyone participates in the growth process. It's good for industry because look at where our economic growth has come from over these last 30 years, since 1991, really. We've had a consumption-driven economy. Growth in consumption has been the driving force of our economy for these 30 years. And that's with increasing millions of people coming into the consuming class, into, first-time buyers of everything from toothpaste to holidays. Now, that's with relatively little inclusion. If we can include 1.4 billion people in our growth processes, we will create wealth for all of Indian industry and for much of the world's industry. And we will create great companies that will be powered forward across the board, across sectors, across years and years and years of tremendous growth. So it's in our interest to really have an inclusive growth process, an economy that is as inclusive as possible. What can we do to make our growth processes more inclusive as industry? Two areas. One within the CSR area, and one very specifically within what's good for business right now. In the CSR area, for education is already the single biggest destination of CSR funding. I think it accounts for just under 40% of all CSR funding. That's a very good thing. Just within CII, my guess is, my rough back of the envelope calculation is that we work as CII members with about 30,000 schools in the country. Now, the new education policy has a very good objective. It says we should try to teach at the right level and ensure second standard outcomes. Very simple, focused objective. I think it's a great objective. And it's one that all of us as CII members should try to practice within all the schools that we work with in any case. And if we work with 30,000 schools, we can influence the outcomes for 1.5 million children a year. That's about 15% of all children in the country. And you do it year on year on year, and pretty soon you're having a pretty dramatic effect on providing children with those basic skills that they need to participate in economic growth in the long run, to participate in a modern economy in the long run. So that's the single, if you like, CSR objective that we should have as companies. But we should go beyond. And we should also worry about our own business objectives. I'll give you a small example from our own firm. One of the things you mentioned, we do energy conservation. We supply a lot of equipment to our customers. That equipment gets installed, it saves customers energy, etc. But what have we found in the past? We find that after a few months, the energy savings start coming down. They jump up when everything gets installed. Over some months, it starts declining because maintenance practices or the way in which it's operated, or simple things, trainers aren't cleaned or whatever. So we've started something called a shared value initiative, where we try to create employment where the customers actually, through a local contractor, hire a group of engineers. We train the engineers, we supervise the engineers, and they then maintain the products on an ongoing basis. We benefit because the products perform better. The customer benefits hugely because energy savings are sustained, and we've created multiples of employment from what we could ever create as a firm ourselves. So it becomes a really nice, inclusive growth engine where we are skilling people to do something. That skilling results in productive employment. That productive employment will then flow through in terms of increased consuming power and spending power. Everyone wins. So I think now this is one example for us as a firm. Every firm can find similar opportunities to do things that are good business and that include more and more people in the country's growth processes.
No, I think, that's a great perspective, Naushad, on the way industry should be thinking even about its own role, right? Because not only are you, when you combine the CSR, you look at your business objectives, you look at nation development, the industry itself benefits, right, through that. And I think the future level of innovation for India, will come with certain non-negotiables, which have to have, social equity, scale, and, this kind of innovation that drives, performance at lower price, affordability, very, very clearly. Because without these agendas, I think your vision and the dream of that India will probably not come true. And I think CII particularly has, taken this position nearly 15 years ago, and, you've chaired the India at 75 Foundation as well, to really see how industry can be a convening platform to align multiple stakeholders to focus on a long-term agenda, so that collaboratively we can work, to be able to ensure, outcomes. And, given that diversity that we have in India with states and, different level of, growth and development, it's hard to prioritize initiatives, right, for in India. But I'm going to put you on the spot with your, your three, points that you like to, always talk about. If we were to look at three areas that industry, should prioritize, right, in order to, again, drive inclusive agenda, inclusive development with the extensive reach and resources that industry would have, what would those be?
So two I mentioned, and I'll repeat those two, and then there's a third one. So the first is this CSR agenda that focus the work that we do with schools as it is. Keep doing all the work that we're doing with schools as a part of our CSR work. But in addition, focus on this one thing of second standard outcomes, right? That every child coming out of the second standard should be able to read and do arithmetic at the second standard level. That single outcome can transform the prospects for that child in their lives, because in the rest of their schooling, instead of spending a large part of their schooling learning how to read and write, they can spend the rest of their schooling learning what they're supposed to in the third and the fifth and the eighth standard. And that means that they then can simply transform their lives, right? The second is this point on skilling, to focus our efforts on skilling people who can get employed, and preferably in sectors, as like the example that I mentioned for us as a company, in sectors that are related to the firm, because then we understand those sectors. So if you're a paint company, skill painters. If you're an auto company, skill mechanics. Skill people in sectors that matter to the firm itself, so that you understand what skills are needed, and you also can very directly actually influence the employment outcomes, the earnings outcomes of many more people. And the third piece is to focus on women, and to focus on we should be very ashamed as a country that we have the lowest female participation in the labor force of the G20, of any country in the G20, including, by the way, Saudi Arabia. We used to be second worst to Saudi Arabia. Now we're worst. Saudi Arabia has a higher female labor force participation ratio than India does. That's a terrible position to be in. If we simply match male and female labor force participation we would be 60% richer as a country right now. So we're not talking about tremendous outcomes. We're just saying, if our female participation is equal to our male participation, which is not huge, we'll be 60% richer as a country. Such a huge opportunity for us. What needs to change for women to be productively employed in the country? So we worry about education outcomes again. We worry about social biases that say, oh, women can't work on the shop floor. Women can't do XYZ job. I mean, who says, let women say that they can't do those jobs? Why should men say? Right? So we get rid of those biases, right? That keep women from entering certain occupations. And then we really worry about how we can provide enough women as role models who rise in organizations and take on and get involved in new professions that are traditionally not occupations that women participate in. I think it's a big opportunity for us. I would say it's our third big inclusion opportunity.
No, I think all the three areas, you talk about is in the area of employment and labor force inclusion, education, leadership positions. There is this, gap that needs to be filled. But how do we do it? Is there something that you can think of, that can clearly enable that to happen? I mean, is there some thought around that? Because there have been so many initiatives, Naushad, and each gets to some level, but at a country level, which you're saying is so important and critical in a time frame of about, say, 2.5 decades. How do we make that happen?
So it's tough, right? It's tough. I think it'll come from companies across the board really engaging very actively in practices that are different. So let me give you a couple of small examples, because I think it'll be many small things that will make a difference. When we hire graduate trainee engineers, the great bulk of people that we recruit in our company every year are graduate trainee engineers. And we used to always end up with, 25 engineers. Out of 25 engineers, 2 would be women. And then we've simply said, no, we have to have a much higher proportion. We're still only at about a third, right? We need to get to a half, right? And when we do, that's a good way, because if you employ enough graduate training engineers, then 5 years out, you have a chance that some of your managers and the newly promoted managers will also be women. 10 years out, the more senior managers, and so on and so forth. So you create that pipeline all the way through. Second, in terms of lateral hiring, a practice again is that if you have 3 candidates that are shortlisted, one of the 3 shortlisted candidates has to be a woman. If you don't have a woman as one of the 3 candidates, you cannot go ahead with the appointment. So, I mean, some of these are, different companies will have to come up with different things how they will approach things. But I think we need to each figure these out for ourselves and then try to practice them to push things ahead in a practical way.
Yeah, and maybe even collectively address that societal bias, that you mentioned. And when you look at global examples, right? When we look at matriarchal societies, for example, this is not an issue, right? Because it is addressed just in a societal construct, right? That has enabled that to happen, very differently. And I think maybe, I don't know if there is a way for us, on a collaborative effort, and since you have prioritized this as one of your top 3 agendas, and probably we'll keep coming back to you even as India at 100. To really, I think it's such a critical, important part, and you rightly outlined the contribution that can make to all the initial aspects of our median incomes and even growing wealthier as a country, right? I mean, we all see the women leaders and how successful in the way they can really navigate so many other situations. So it's a big missing part for us to collectively.
It totally is, and I'm not claiming any primacy or pride of place here. I mean, we have as much work to do in our own company. So I'll give you an example. We've recently helped support a R&D Managers of the Future program, and I was at the convocation of the second batch in Ahmedabad last month, and very proud of the program, very happy with the program. 25 great engineers, very well received program. All 6 companies, 25 engineers, not one woman.
Yeah.
So we have lots of work to do, including from us.
Yeah, and there is symbolism, having a woman on a board and a few other things. But I think that has to be, pursued and accelerated, and what you rightly said, grown at a much larger pace. But also Naushad, moving to an area that I know you're very passionate about, and which is again very critical, for India's being able to achieve the aspirational India that you talk about, is our entire area of higher education, and really how do we use that specifically to strengthen our global positioning, that we've come to be recognized in terms of our technology, or if not maybe in digital and IT, but in many other areas, if you were to develop that, our innovation ecosystem, and really say that okay, India is a powerhouse of technology and innovation. Very important for us to have the higher education system to be able to deliver that. How do you think about that when we are looking at the next 25 years?
So, I mean, it's the higher education system is critical to the success of our firms in the long run, because when many companies, maybe most companies will say people are our most important asset. And if that's true, and I think it is true, then what determines the quality of people? It's the quality of education that they receive. That's the inflow into most companies. So how good are the people that we're recruiting on a regular basis? So every company has a real direct interest in improving the quality of higher education outcomes. So this is not something that's CSR for companies. This is in our direct interest. We should get involved, right? How can we get involved? What should we do, right? And I'll make some comments about what industry should do and what we should do from a policy perspective. So what we should do from industry is work with the colleges that we're recruiting from to improve the quality of the education they provide. So expose faculty at the colleges to have them come and do, programs in industry, let them take sabbaticals and spend time, 2 months in the summer every year, working in industry, just to understand what industry is working on. They'll go back and then their own work in research and so on, will be somewhat influenced by what we're doing in industry, if they know what we're doing. Second, give students internships. Go to colleges and participate in actual teaching. If we can collectively make a big difference, at least for engineering colleges. More widely in higher education, more difficult, but engineering colleges, management institutes, we can very directly contribute to the quality of outcomes. And then from the policy perspective, recent announcement over the last 2 weeks of the National Research Foundation, very good initiative, good number, 50,000 crores over 5 years. That 50,000 crores over 5 years, if it's implemented as announced, which is it will be provided only to higher education research, not to government laboratories, but to higher education research, it will double the current budget. The current spending is about 10,000 crores a year in higher education, the research done in higher education. If it's another 10,000 crores coming from the National Research Foundation, that will double it. That's a great initiative. We have to ensure that it gets implemented as designed, that the state funds that program liberally, and that it is accessible on a peer-reviewed competitive basis to all education institutions, public and private. It can really be transformative, because if faculty do more research, the teaching that they have will be more current. The students that come out of those institutes will be that much better educated, and they will be, if you like, the fuel for innovation within industry itself.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because I think at the end of the day, innovation within industry is something I know you always talk about, about the R&D spends that Indian private sector has vis-a-vis many of the, other countries.
It's very low.
It's very low. And, really, there needs to be something that, triggers that, right? I mean, I understand competitiveness globally and, companies are doing whatever best they can to stay there, right? But there is an environment or an ecosystem that somewhere prioritizes that, as an enabler of maybe faster growth, that which you outlined right in the beginning, and I think without innovation and technological advancement, especially in today's day and age, which is becoming so disruptive, right? Because as things get more digitized and industry 4.0 becomes larger and more prevalent across areas and sectors, and with AI and new emerging technologies that are just making it so much more disruptive for existing industries and businesses, it's important for our industry to invest, or keep that at a prioritized level. How do we really enable that? Because that will give us a level playing field, at least at a global level. Because if we do achieve all the things that you mentioned about India at 100, we would be a force to reckon with globally in any case. So how do we make that happen?
So, I'll suggest just one thing, which is an exercise we've tried to get all the firms participating in the same R&D managers program that I mentioned earlier. We've asked them to do a benchmarking exercise for their firm on R&D investments. And we've said, compare their own R&D investments with the R&D investments of the top 10 to 20 firms in their own industry. And say, as a percentage of sales, how much do they invest? What's the comparison? Given that percentage, which is usually publicly available, it's not difficult to get. Then for one or two firms in that top 20, 10 or 20 list worldwide, look more granularly at what these other firms are doing. What kind of flow of output do they have in terms of new products and processes coming out, say over the last 5 years? How many people do they have in their R&D departments? What qualifications do they have? We can start doing a more granular benchmarking exercise of our own R&D departments vis-a-vis the R&D departments of the leading firms in our industry. Then we'll be clearer on the gaps. Then we'll be clearer that, listen, because otherwise I find that sometimes when we go around and talk about, look, India needs to increase its R&D spending, and we have to start with in-house R&D spending going up. The general view is that we're already doing a lot. And then the only way you can change that is if people actually look at their spending and what output they get as a result of their spending, and what kind of people they have in R&D, and they do benchmarking with other firms. And then it starts becoming clearer that where the gaps are, where are we fine, where are we not fine, what do we need to really address and do.
No, so is it, sometimes I think you raised a great point here, the outcomes that you derive out of the way we define R&D in India. Maybe, I don't know, because there needs to be I think an ecosystem, right, that supports it, right? Whether it is the right kind of talent, the external, you talked of academia, you talk of, the way the government looks at R&D. Of course, in India, the large part of the R&D expense comes through the government. I mean, even today, even though it's a small number,
over half,
but is all of that R&D really giving an outcome, right? I mean, R&D in its specific term itself is, not necessarily going to give you outcome, but what I'm saying is better outcomes that industry can use, and maybe there are some global examples of countries that are better at doing that than others. And we know that. Is there something for us to learn, but still add our Indian way of, something to it? And have you thought further on this?
So every year, there's a global innovation index that's published by, I think it's done between IMD or NCR, one of the European business schools, and then CII is also involved in it, and WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, is involved. And one of the things that they've said for many years is that we we've improved our ranking, but we're still ranked fairly low in the Global Innovation Index. One of the areas where we always rank near the top is in the efficiency of R&D spending. So we don't spend much, but what we spend, we use very efficiently. In other words, what little R&D we do, we get very good outcomes. Now, the hope should be that if we are so efficient in our R&D spending, why don't we do more of it, right? So because the returns to R&D investments are huge. The returns are typically 80% plus a year. I mean, with those kinds of returns, we should be doing a lot more of R&D. And I hope that as one does more of this kind of benchmarking, the efficiency with which we do R&D should start showing up in us doing much more, and then creating those kinds of innovative, leading technology firms that you were talking about, and that we need to have a strong place in the world.
It's very interesting you say this, because just recently a venture fund was making a pitch, to me, and the track record wasn't that good, or there was one where the track record was excellent, and they said the only push we get from our investors, you're not taking enough risk because you're not failing more. we want a worse outcome than that, because taking is also about seeing that much failure. It's not only about efficiency, because then you will be cautious and you'll probably have incremental innovation, but not disruptive innovation, right? So I think it's definitely a very hard piece to navigate, and that's where we see this complex merging of new age business models and traditional businesses, and like we say, lost leaders for a long time, but then suddenly able to change. And how do we, as a society, as industry, really bring about something that will probably get both of these to work together in a great society, right?
They say that in a good manufacturing company gets it right first time. They say a good R&D company gets it wrong first time. Because if it doesn't get it wrong, it's exactly as you're saying, it's not doing enough, it's not trying enough things. So, that is a different mindset, and how you mix that mindset of good manufacturing, get it right first time, and good R&D, get it wrong first time, is a tough job.
And how do you align different sets of stakeholders around being able to coexist? And therefore I say, right, the challenge for India, is that much harder, because of the scale, the disparity that we have, in economic section, social fabric, many aspects, right? But at the end of the day, really, for us to be able to collaborate effectively, we do need all our stakeholders to come together, right? I mean, and I think the entire basis of India at 75, the India at 100 agenda is really to get multi-stakeholder, alignment, engagement, aspiration capturing, to be able to build something of a vision that, touches or resonates, with a common thread across large section of society, right? What you also, mentioned. Now, each stakeholder has to play a role. Government has to play their role, private sector needs to play their role, civil society, needs to play a role, and it has to happen collaboratively. So, I know it's a very tough question. Like India at 75 and India at 100, we brought, a lot of pro bono volunteering, companies actually, letting their professionals engage in society, because there's a big learning that comes back also as a part of it. And, many examples have been tried to see how to instill that sense of national pride, get the heart to really say that we need to make this happen, because then the commitment also grows. It's a complex problem, but it's an important one for us to be able to think about and, solve for. So how do you think about this collaboration amongst multiple stakeholders?
So, I think the first piece is, how do you get people aligned? And this is true in companies, it's true across sectors, it's true between industry and government, with civil society, etc. I think shared alignment will come from shared understanding. So, and I think these kinds of conversations, but the broader work that India at 100 and India at 75 have done, plays a big role in building that shared understanding. Because from that shared understanding, I mean, there's no other basis for shared alignment. I mean, otherwise alignment will be the boss saying, here's how it is, now do as I say. That's authoritarian. That's not shared understanding. That's someone dictating what needs to be done. So I think it's a much more positive, strong way if um, we understand each other better. From the understanding, we develop a shared view of what the problem is that we're trying to solve for, a shared vision of where we want to end up being, and then a shared pathway of how we're going to get there. And that shared understanding, I think, can become the foundation for alignment, motivation, encouragement of each other, respect for each other. Um, you know, too often, like say when you talk about industry institute interaction in the education space, too often you have these very weird comments on each side, which doesn't help. That institutes will say of industry, oh, they're not interested in R&D, they're not interested in development, they're not interested in anything except what their profit is this year. And then industry will say, oh, institutions, they're all up, their heads are in the clouds, they don't understand time frames, etc., etc. If you turn that on its head and you expect the best of each other, all of a sudden collaboration becomes much more feasible and much more interesting. So, it's that shared respect, shared understanding from different stakeholders that starts building, I think, the alignment that we need for common objectives. But we have to start by saying these are our common objectives.
Yeah, no, I think, and I completely, I think it's so important because everyone needs to resonate, with that shared aspect of, when especially industry, we say, do you compete or do you collaborate, right? Like we talk competitive collaboration, or somewhere where the larger goal is larger than the individual goal, but everybody individually is also probably.
So my view would be collaborate on inputs, compete on outputs. So compete in the market so that customers get a better deal and we keep coming up with something better, and collaborate on inputs, collaborate on the quality of education, quality of CSR work that we do, how we engage with each other, how we work with government, collaborate on inputs.
No, I think that's a great way for us to view this, right? Because when you break it down the way you have done that, that could be a very the framework level guiding factor, and it's not only industry, right? I think it is also when it comes to citizens and it comes to, civil society, even for different government agencies, how do they collaborate, state, district, national. I think it's a great way to kind of look at a society fabric. And I think that could be a very powerful takeaway for, the India at 100. And, one of the discussions that has come up in a few of the earlier ones is also, India by its core nature, right, has that element of, the larger whole because of maybe the way, we have been based as society, and one who has the potential to be a super partner to the world rather than assert itself as a complete superpower. To be a super partner, you need to have both collaboration and competitiveness really built in very effectively. So I think it's a very important theme, and thank you, Naushad, for highlighting that. And as I'm looking at the clock, I realize we are beginning to run out of time. But we cannot end this conversation, without really thinking about the future and talking about the future, and especially the future leaders, from India, because ultimately, it's that leadership, it's that youth energy, that is going to, make this happen. It's a big strength for India. It's our demographic dividend. We talked about, women and that power, youth and its power. And, given that you chair Ananta Aspen, as an institution and, having been closely associated, both of us, we understand the power of great youth leadership development, based on shared values, right? Even a shared understanding ultimately comes on shared values. And, how do we really make that transition happen? So what's your message, to the young people of this country, and really how do you believe they can engage deeper with national development, of course, and, their own individual careers and everything will anyways get shaped in that process.
People would often ask me, I used to, as you mentioned in your very kind introduction, people used to ask me, which do you enjoy more, teaching at Stanford or working in industry in India? And I used to always say, well, I really enjoy the teaching. I really enjoy the students that I work with and really intelligent students. It's a lot of fun, all of that. But I was very clear that where I'm truly satisfied was working in India. And the reason is, maybe it's just my ego speaking, but I felt that I made much more of a difference here. That I figured that if I never ever went back to Stanford again, it wouldn't have been any worse a university. If they'd never heard of me, it would have been just as good. Make more of a difference here. And I think that's true across sectors in India. We can make a difference. We can make a big difference. And ultimately, that's what I think life is all about. It's if you want a life of purpose, you want to influence things. Even if you make one person's life better, you've lived a worthwhile life. And I think that ability to contribute in whatever field one is interested in is so great in India. And it's so great in India because we're a private sector-led economy. It's so great in India because we have such active civil society with such active NGOs. We're supposed to have 3 million NGOs, which, as I always like to say, is probably counting everyone's socially committed grandmother, but it's the largest NGO sector in the world. These are opportunities to participate. These are opportunities to actually contribute in whatever way. And the results and the outcomes and the benefits come back. They come back again and again, and they come back bigger and bigger. But it's just an opportunity to really live a life of purpose. If you live in India, a friend of ours, Rajan, you may remember Hans Gass. He used to be the MD of Sandvik Asia in Pune, and he was a huge enthusiast of India. And I remember once having a conversation with him about working in France versus working in India. And he says, it's no choice. There's no choice. He says, what did I worry about when I was in France? He says, what were the discussions? The discussions were, how can we finish work early on Fridays? How can we give 2 more days of holidays at Christmas? How can we have another week of holiday in the year? He says, this is the focus. The focus was on what you do outside of work. And he says the focus for him when he was with Sandvik in Pune was, how can we enter a new world market? How can we improve quality and beat the Japanese in quality of this product? It was all about achievement and the results of the company. He says, where would you rather work? In France or in India? He says, no contest. And I think that's what we offer as a country in abundance in every sector, whether one is a teacher or whether one is working in industry, whether one is running a company, working in it, whether one is in a university, whether one is in government, there are opportunities to contribute. That to me is what makes us great. And it'll be true for the next 25 years too.
No, absolutely. And I think what you talked of a developed, satisfied society to a hungry society, right? In those problems and challenges lie the opportunities. I think you talked of purpose, right? And really building that purpose in a society where you can see and you can make a difference is so much more different from just having a theoretical understanding, of that. Like even in my family, as you know, my dad got us to India, to be raised in India, to be able to sensitize ourselves to that environment. I did the same with my girls, and I think that is so important, for us to be able to understand and appreciate the difference that one can make. And I think if every young person in this country is able to align around, their positive contribution to solving this, I think really we'll get there, irrespective of what else happens. So I think a lot of that energy lies in the young people of India, and they're molding themselves, to enable this to happen. But very, very inspiring, Naushad, what you just, ended with. And I think it's been such a lovely conversation, right from the vision to really how do we go about, making this happen. And all I can say, Naushad, you're going to have to keep playing a larger role in ensuring that's happening, not only through your businesses and through your other commitments, but also around CII and India at 100 as we further move on in this direction. But thank you so much for your time, for all your inputs. Very enriching and engaging conversation.
Thank you, Rajan. Always, as you know, as always, a pleasure to be involved in anything you are.
No, likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.